So I want to share a story with you. And it's a story that no matter how many times I tell it, it's still difficult for me to share. This is a story about a 9-year-old shoe-shining boy in Cusco, Peru, that changed my life. In 2001, I was actually a university student doing an internship in Peru. And I first met Edgar as I sat on a park bench eating lunch. And he came up to me insisting to shine my shoes. And this little kid, he was persistent. And it took me a while to convince him that it actually wasn't possible to shine my tennis shoes. So he was just the cutest little kid. And I ended up sharing my lunch with him that afternoon. And the way he ate the food shocked me. I never remember seeing someone eat food like that. So that night, as I ate dinner, I saved some of my food and I went back out to look for Edgar. And when I found him and gave him the food, he took the food back and started sharing it with his little friends, which to me was like such a touching gesture. So this became a daily ritual. And finding Edgar became the highlight of my day every day. My last night in Cusco, as I was walking home, I stumbled upon Edgar sleeping in the street. He had his sweater pulled over his knees, trying to stay warm. Someone had stolen his shoe-shining kit. And he told me he was too afraid to go home because he knew his father depended on him to help provide for his family. I just can't imagine what that would feel like as a 9-year-old to have that weight on you. So I gave him the little cash that I had, but that night I could hardly sleep. I was so worried about this little boy. And the next day I got on a bus to leave Cusco for the last time when I looked out the window and I saw Edgar. And I had just enough time where I slid open the window of this bus and he ran next to me, waving goodbye, and he had one arm wrapped around this big bag of candy that he was now selling in the streets. He was a true entrepreneur, which I now love. So I returned to university, determined to better understand why inequality existed. Why some children got to spend their days learning and playing, while others, like Edgar, didn't have that chance. I wanted to understand what we could do collectively to close that gap. It was actually in an economics class that I first started learning about something that was pulling people out of poverty at an unprecedented scale. It was the opening of markets. India and China in the early 2000s were experiencing record economic growth. Literally hundreds of millions of people were being pulled out of poverty. So I want everyone right now to close their eyes. And I want you to imagine that it's the year 1820. And I want you to put a number in your head. It's going to be a number from 1 to 100 that represents the percentage of the world's population living in poverty. Does everyone have that number in their head? Okay, you can open up your eyes. The answer is 94. 94% of the world was living in poverty in the year 1820. 84% of them were living in extreme poverty. Now, fast forward about 160 years to the year I was born in 1978, this had been reduced to about 50%. By 1981, it was 44%. By the year 1990, 37%. By 2010, 16%. Last year, for the first time in human history, less than 10% of the world was living in extreme poverty. It's amazing to think that since I was in high school, literally 1 billion people have been pulled out of poverty. And at the same time, this amazing tale of capitalism conflicted with some of my own personal experiences. When I was 4 years old, my family moved to the developing world. this is where I began seeing disturbing wealth inequality. One of my first memories as a 4-year-old was seeing children that were my age, 3 or 4 years old, that were standing on the streets completely naked. You can't see something like that as a child and not have it change you inside. And here in the United States, we also see this wealth inequality. When I was born in 1978, the top 1% controlled 10% of the share of income. Today, that top 1% controls 20% of the share of income. The rich continue to get richer, but the poorest of the poor are often left behind. And these shortcomings of capitalism extend beyond people. They extend to our environments as well. Nothing has been more damaging to the earth than capitalism. I've been in Brazil and Thailand and seen rivers that were slowed to a crawl with black sludge. I've been in streets in China where I couldn't see more than a few blocks ahead of me because the air pollution was so thick. I've been on beautiful beaches in the Philippines where the sands and the seas were covered in garbage. Unfortunately, capitalism has often seen people and the earth as commodities that we can simply consume and then discard just to maximize profit. So the question is capitalism good or is it bad? I've questioned this so many times myself, and I'm sure you have as well. The answer is that it's actually up to us. When my grandparents were born, there were children in the United States as young as 7 years old working in factories up to 12 and 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, because they were less expensive to employ than an adult. Fortunately, there was a movement of people that saw this injustice, and they demanded a change. They made sure that children went to school and not to work. So capitalism has evolved tremendously over the last 100 years, over the last century. What do we want capitalism to look like over the next 100 years? We are the ones that get to decide. So when I graduated, I ended up spending the next 10 years building businesses. And I built 2 successful businesses as an entrepreneur. But I never forgot Edgar. And I never forgot the promise that I made on that bus as I left, that I was going to dedicate my life to making the world a better place. So I started exploring what I could do to make a difference. And I believed that capitalism could help me do it. I believed that businesses had a responsibility to do good in the world. And I also believed that through a business, I could do more good than I could on my own. Because a business could inspire hundreds, thousands, millions of people to go out and do good. So I started looking at examples. I look at Warby Parker, an amazing company that was started by some classmates of mine in business school that has literally helped millions of people get access to healthcare, eye care. I look at Tom's Shoes, another amazing company that injected its do good mission into the core of its brand. And I started exploring what I could do. I was living in Brazil at the time when I came up with an idea. And this idea was something that I believed could change the world. So I moved back to the United States, and I incorporated this business as a benefit corporation. This is a business entity similar to an LLC or an S Corp or a C Corp. It's a new type of entity where a business makes a commitment, a legal commitment in its articles of incorporation to look beyond its bottom line, to make decisions based on people and planet as well. And I want to tell you a little bit about this business. It's 2 years old, and I believe we've discovered something revolutionary. And I want to share with you how we are changing the world, with the hope that it can inspire some of you to go out and do good and find your own ways of having an impact. So there's 4 things that we do. The first is that we use profits that we get from selling our outdoor gear, our packs, our sleeping bags, our tents, our jackets, and we use these profits to sustainably give back to nonprofits in the world that are having an impact. So we go find nonprofits that work in some of the poorest countries of the world. One of them that I want to share about is called Proximity Designs. And they work in Myanmar with rural farmers. And I want to tell you the story about the man on the bottom right named Kotar Tu. As you can see, he was born with no hands. And when asked what his biggest hindrance was to becoming a successful farmer, he said, "The lack of water in the summer months to water my crops." So Proximity Designs had heard the same thing from many farmers and had developed a foot-powered water pump, a treadle pump, that extracted water from the ground and allowed farmers to have access year-round to water. Kotar Tu was able to increase his family's income by $200 that year, a life-changing amount of money in rural Myanmar. The second way we have an impact with our business is through our supply chain, through purchasing power. We understood that thousands of people were involved in our supply chain. And so we started digging back and trying to discover how we could have an impact. And I want to share two examples. The first is here in the Philippines, where we saw an incredible amount of waste that was being generated in the manufacturing process. And we went to our sewers and we told them, hey, we want to use this material. We've developed this design of a pack, but we want to give you guys, the sewers, creative license to choose materials and colors. And there's only one rule, to make no bag alike. And as you can see, the product's beautiful. It's fun, it's funky, the straps don't match, and you can see the personality of every single sewer in that bag. The second story is especially touching for me because I used to live in Bolivia. And we've gone to some of the remote corners of Bolivia and started working with farmers and communities that farm llamas. And we're sourcing this llama wool and using it as insulation in some of our jackets. It's been so fun for two reasons. The first, because we get to work with these amazing people and see the impact we can have on them. The second reason is because who doesn't love a jacket that's full of llama wool? The third way we have impact is actually by empowering our employees. So one of our employees came up with the idea of employing refugees, teen refugees, here in Salt Lake City, where we're based. And we give them their first job. We teach them how to create a resume, how to do a job interview, how to open up a bank account, and how to budget. And then we have them write thank you cards. And we include these thank you cards in all of our customer orders. Another one of our employees came up with the idea of teaching coding classes to refugees. So we started teaching a 20-week coding class on Saturdays where our team would come and help teach refugees these important skills. The last way we have impact is through events, where we inspire others to go out and do good alongside us. We do this through an event we call the Questival. And it's this 24-hour race where we get millennials out in the outdoors and giving service in the community. Collectively, they've donated tens of thousands of pounds of food to local food banks. They've donated thousands of hours of community service. They've cleaned up local parks and trails. And as a business, this costs us nothing. All we have to do is ask. What would the world look like if every business looked for a way that it could positively impact its community and the world? What if every single employee was empowered by its organization to go do good? What I've discovered is that capitalism can be a force for good in the world, if done right, and can put us on a path to end extreme poverty. Some of you may have wondered what happened to Edgar. I've wondered the same thing. What became of his life? Did he have a chance to go to school? Well, about a year ago, I decided to go find out. And I went back to Peru in search of Edgar, just as I had every day 13 years earlier. And through a series of small miracles, I was able to find him. It was one of the most emotional experiences of my life. he was still working in the streets of Cusco. He'd been orphaned just a few years after I first met him, and he was now raising his 2 younger siblings. We spent the day together, embracing and sharing. He took me to the home where he lived, a home that he'd built, made of mud with a hole in the ground for a latrine. There was a piece of me that was discouraged as I saw how he lived. At the same time, he was so hopeful. He was so proud. And I was proud for him. Edgar changed my life. He put me on a new path, a path where I started looking for ways that I could do good. Who is your Edgar? And what can you do today to make the world a better place? Thank you.